Welcome to the Deconstructing Data podcast and broadcast. I'm Jessie Lezak, fractional CMO with BDEX, along with David Finkelstein, BDEX's founder and CEO. It's great to see you, David. What's new in your world?
Hey, likewise, Jesse. I don't know, all good here. Week's gone by pretty fast. I guess that holiday on Monday caused a shorter week and just made everything accelerate.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that. I totally forgot we had Monday off, but it makes sense why I still have such a long to-do list. But I'm glad I get a break for this awesome conversation because today we are welcoming back DeVaris Brown, CEO and co-founder of Meroxa. He was on one of our earlier episodes, but we're going to be talking to him about some different topics today. And let me go ahead and bring him in. Welcome back to the show, DeVaris.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you back, DeVaris. For those that missed the last time you were on, let's kick this off with an introduction. Maybe you can give us a little bit of a background on your history and what led you to Meroxa, and a little bit about what Meroxa does today.
Yeah. Again, thanks for having me back on. I am DeVaris, as Jessie said, CEO, co-founder of Meroxa. Before doing Meroxa, well, actually, what Meroxa does is that we help people move data with code, and we do it in real time, so that we make sure that your data gets where it needs to get in the format that it needs to be, so you can do all the amazing things that your job, your customers, your stakeholders require. Before this, I was product exec at a few places, most notably Twitter, Zendesk, visual supply company, Heroku. Started off as a software engineer, working at places like Microsoft and Cisco, and some other places. But yeah, other than that, professionally, that's pretty much me. I always wanted to make sure that I can, throughout my career, help developers get to their happy pathway. And honestly, that's the reason why I became a product manager, because I always had really, really terrible product managers as an engineer. And I'm like, somebody can help do this better, do this job better. So yeah, that's me. Originally from Chicago, Southside Chicago, born and raised, went to University of Illinois, Go Illini. So yeah, that's me all day.
I can't help but ask what you think about them talking about moving the White Sox, being from Southside Chicago. Have you heard that talk?
Yeah, I hear. I mean, the Bears are moving, the White Sox are moving. I mean, I live in the Bay Area, and I think the only sports team a couple of them that we have, professional sports teams that I care about. Everybody's moving to Vegas, right? So it's like, yeah, I don't know if I'm the unlucky charm or what, but my teams need to stay put.
I agree. Well, let's get into this first topic. I'm going to bring it up on the screen. Architecting centralized data, constructing a solid, trustworthy data hub. Can you kick us off on this, DeVaris?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, look, I've been at a bunch of places, doing a bunch of things, and especially around the data realm, everybody has their own opinions as to how qualified and curated the data sets that they're working on are. And to be honest, they're usually just really terrible copies of whatever you have in the master database. But somebody in RevOps has that one Excel spreadsheet, that is like, you make one change in one field and the entire company is at peril, right? And so, we were just actually talking about this off screen, where it's kind of like a lot of these systems are kind of garbage in, garbage out. And so what you've seen over time is that a lot of the decentralized data platforms, whether that's, Hadoop or in ACFS and that ecosystem, now, everybody's doing data lakes or Delta lakes or whatever it is that you want to call it, in data warehousing and all of that. You're becoming beholden to the masters that have the control, compute, and storage. And a lot of times the actions as to what you want to do don't necessarily depend on you having this big, huge data set, right? And the hard part is like, as new trends happen, you're less likely to be able to, or have, the less likelihood of being able to pivot to take advantage of kind of new trends and paradigms. And so having a thoughtful approach to the data that is moving about your system, what jobs your current stakeholders, current customers, and future versions of both of those will be performing. And having a person that honestly just gives a crap about it, like uh that needs to be the standard at pretty much every company going forward. I mean, I feel like that's a hot take. Maybe it's not, but um, it's just one of those things where intentionality across this stuff, and this is what I mean by architecting centralized data, is like you need to be think question first, right? So if I'm in marketing and I want to do let's say I want to do some outreach, right? Programmatic outreach. That might be some ads, that might be email, that might be that LinkedIn, like that type of stuff. um Instead of just working with the data sets that I have, thinking about, all right, well, what are the data points that I need that can actually, increase the likelihood of opens, conversions, whatever it is, right? Like my job is to drive MQLs, all right, give highly qualified leads. So what are the data points that I need to get into that? And like write a PRD, understand where your data is coming from, understand, what fields that data provider has, and like all that type of stuff. Understand the intervals as to how often that data changes, like all of that stuff before you create, go purchase a system that moves into your data warehouse, and then you have the ability to hook it up to some kind of marketing automation suite or whatever it is that's there, right? Like that's what I mean about having the intentionality. But then the centralization of it is the happy side effect of the intentionality, right? Like that's the mindset that more companies need to go into it, this like data journey with. And honestly, it'll save you a lot of money. It might not necessarily save you time up front because you're doing a lot of planning and iteration, but it'll save you time on the implementation and kind of further iterations down the line, because you have a solid centralized structure and plan and strategy in place, right? Like people, kind of buy these tools and throw more tools and bodies at problems that honestly could be just solved by having an intentional conversation as to, what are we trying to do here? What are we trying to measure? And where is this data coming from? What outcomes are we trying to drive? And I think that's really, the what I wanted to convey around just having a centralized data hub, right? Like trustworthy data hub. We can talk about data contracts and like all that stuff, but all of that really honestly is basically saying, like, I know the source of my data. I know what it emits. I know what pieces I need from it to drive these outcomes. And I know that there's a process in place that when that source changes, this is how we remediate and kind of course correct when those changes happen. I mean, like if we can get to that point, a lot of the applications that we have, that consume a lot of this data markedly improve, right? Rising tides, right, raise all ships. So
yeah,
there's a lot there. Sorry,
yeah.
but
No, that's excellent. You make really good points, and they're points relative to conversations we've had here on the show in the past, because there's a lot of situations that happen. We've talked to a lot of people especially in the larger the company, that you run into more and more of these problems where the data isn't centralized and it isn't, planned out and thought out as meticulously as you've laid out. And so a lot of times they're just collecting data and they don't know why they're collecting it. They don't know what the ultimate use will be. And in that process, maybe they're not, it's not in a format that everyone can use. So now they're in a situation where, how do they use it? Right. And so, like you said, RevOps wants to use some data, and accounting wants to use some other data, and product wants to use some other data. And so now you have to figure out how to take this, data lake or whatever you've created and, put it into some sort of format that each department or, each division can use. And that's always sort of been the challenge. If you don't think through that process ahead of time and you just start collecting data, then you have to figure out how to segment it later. And that's when you end up with a lot of these situations where you have now marketing goes in and says, oh, I need this data. So someone creates an ability for them to pull that data out. But guess what? It was not easy. So now what are they going to do? They're going to work with that data offline in some other area. And so now all of a sudden the data become decentralized. And so you attempted to centralize the data and you've created this decentralized structure because it's not in a format or easily usable by everybody in every different team that needs to use it. So that it's detrimental. You need to, as you said, kind of go through that process of doing the work ahead of time to make sure that the data becomes usable to everybody. Otherwise, you just kind of break the process.
Yeah, I mean, but the other piece of that is that has real implications on costs too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So think about any modern organization, right? That needs data to do anything. I probably got I got my production app, right? I got probably some notion of analytics that I need to have. I have let's just say some ERP system. I got some accounting system. I got my HR ops. I got all of the stuff that engineers use, right, and emit. Observability stuff. I got support. I got Salesforce, CRM stuff, right? All of those things are going into one centralized area where now I have to, and let's say I have some decent amount of customer, volume, right? All of those things have to go into a centralized storage. And then now I'm going over thousands, millions, of records, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of records to try to generate these reports all the time, right? So that's compute, that's storage that I have to deal with. And then I multiply that by each of the functional areas that are like, oh, well, yeah, I need this thing from, our production app and Zendesk and, Salesforce. And I need to run this report. And so you're doing this all the time, right? And so, that decentralization is not just a kind of a zero sum game, right? I'm taking, it's not a shared entity, right? I'm taking resources around that could be used and repurposed for different things. And I think that that's really the issue. The other part of it is if I have this big data set, who's writing these queries? It's usually I either have to go hire a data engineer, data analyst, or go bother an engineer. So now I'm basically, and then that query or that job that gets written in Spark or, that War and Peace long query that's joining across all of these multiple tables or, multiple buckets, right? That's taking time away from engineering. Very, very brittle. But again, now you have the rev ops, marketing ops, all these teams that are dependent upon that one single query that's aggregating all of this information. And if the model changes in there, or if somebody gets it wrong or all this other stuff, now we've been basing business decisions across all of that instead of, let's just talk about it up front. What questions are we trying to ask that can determine the health of the business or give us insights for our customers and stakeholders, right? That's the kind of nuanced thinking. A lot of folks that when they embark on these data journeys, they just don't even think about. They don't even have the aperture to understand that the problem is more than, hey, I just want to know how many widgets we sold last year in this particular region, right? And it's okay, well, do you want the widgets for VIP customers? Do you want it for how do you want to slice and dice it? Do you want it over a span of time? All these things. And it's well, shit, if I didn't actually collect my data like that in the first place, now it makes that task going, to solve that infinitely more complex. And that's really why these conversations up front need to happen in that structure. So that way you can kind of map okay, well, here's what we need to start collecting. Here's what we need to enable folks to you know, kind of go chart their own destiny.
That's all a great point, and it kind of leads into decentralized consumption. So you were already talking a little bit about how we are all a little bit decentralized, but promoting data access and utilization for all. So then there's that too. There's people who need access to this and don't have it. Can you kick us off on this second topic, DeVaris?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, look, everybody works in different ways. You know, some folks work on Excel, you know, Google Sheets, Tableau, whatever it is, right? People write code. And so having the ability to enable self-service for people to chart their own destiny, to solve the problems that they want, is the holy grail. But you can't do that without having a curated data set that is you know, applicable for that role and those outcomes. And so different vendors have talked about, you know, like medallion architecture, where it's like, oh, I'm pulling in the raw data set, then I'm doing a little bit of light transformation, and then the people closer to the problem have the ability to go transform all of this stuff. You got, you know, all types of different, you know, kind of marketing ways that people have talked about this problem. But honestly, it's just like, look, we're just trying to decentralize so people can autonomously do their jobs. I mean, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, but here's the question. I mean, does it come down to, like, is there a product solution? Is there a way to solve this problem with product? You're a product guy. So, you know, what we talked about earlier, you know, people are going to want to pull data out. How do we stop them from then, you know, sort of, you know, creating the decentralization, right? Is it a product? Is product the answer, or is it a process problem? Like, can that, yeah, you know, I think that, you know, there's a process. Yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly.
People,
right.
Process, and platform.
Right. Exactly. I mean, but the question is that you have to have the process in place, right?
Yep.
Culture.
Is there a way we can use product to enforce the process? I guess that's what I'm saying.
Absolutely. I mean, inside of every PRD. Oh, let me ask this question. When you say product, what do you mean by that?
Well, the product being the data hub, you know, whatever it is, you know. So what you were talking about, okay, the ultimate goal is to make it self-serve, make it so that the marketer can access the data that they need, or finance can access the data that they need, whatever it is, right?
Yep.
And ultimate goal is to allow the product to do that, right? Make it as self-serve as possible. But then at the same time, you know, I think on the process side, you want to limit some things, right? Because you want to limit their ability to take that data and put it somewhere else, and then start working with it somewhere else, because then that's where you end up in this sort of decentralized mode.
Yeah, and for me, I don't think decentralization is bad if you give people the proper parameters to do their consumption, right? It's bad when you don't know the quality of the data going in, and they're making decisions based off of data that is 50 to 60% okay. You know, like that's the issue, right? And if you were in an organization, I can guarantee you between 95 to 99% accuracy on the data that's going into it. Like, you don't care about decentralization. You're like, yeah, because I know that's right. And so the answer to me is yes, product. You know, for me, product is a big word, because it's like there's a product organization, there's a product process, and then there's a product offering, right? And each of those things can be tuned to enable decentralization. So if I have this, like, you know, data hub or whatever it is that you want to call it, if I know that the data going into it has been structured in a way such that anytime there's a new data or changes that are getting onboarded into that like, I know it has been rigorously, you know, went through this rigorous process of, okay, what questions is this data answering? Who are the stakeholders of it? What is the change management process? All right, like all this stuff. Who has it been reviewed by? Like all this stuff. And then once it gets to my data lake or data warehouse, it gets into the appropriate bucket for marketing, revenue, sales, you know, operations, finance, you know, HR, blah, blah, blah. and it's like already been basically kind of sanitized for you, then it's kind of like, all right, well, cool. Now you can hook up whatever consumption tool that you want to go get it, right? That can be a Kafka topic. That can be a visualization tool like Tableau or something like that, right? It can be Streamlit. It can be anything that you need. But at that point, we know that it's already been curated and it's already been cleansed and it's been tagged and blah, 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 blah. So that way the decentralization is kind of useful at that point.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, and I think that's a good point to make sure that, like you said, the data is tagged properly, and also that you can control how the data is being updated, so that you know that it's up to date and that there's not data being pulled out and then it's being updated elsewhere, and then someone's working offline with this other data, and now it's no longer up to date.
Absolutely. I mean, look, at the end of the day, right? Like everybody knows that data is the lifeblood of an organization. And just having everybody wants to work autonomously, all right? And so, nobody wants to have meetings about meetings. Nobody wants to be told what they can and can't do, right? And so let's just start there, right? Like how do we enable that with the tools? Like I said, people, process, and platform. How do you enable that going forward, right? And that's really where as a product person, remember I was like, product is process, is people, and then there's also the offering, right? How do you enable product to facilitate that? And I think that's really the balance that intentionality can help strike.
Yeah, we've gotten internally as a company, we've gotten in sort of the habit of, whenever someone requests some data, right? Let's just say a customer makes an inquiry and says, "Hey, tell me what you have here," or whatever it is. We're trying to solve a problem for a customer. There's a recognition there that there's a need, and so we've gotten in sort of the habit to say, okay, well, if we're gonna sort of run this query once, then let's build a report against it, so that if in the future someone needs this query again, we're not rebuilding that query again. So now we're building up more and more sort of internal features into our data, so that if once one request is made, I think that there's a good chance that request is going to come up again. So you might as well just sort of put in the little extra work that's necessary at the time when you build the query once, so you don't have to build it again.
Yeah, but then people
over time, that's enabled us to have sort of this big dashboard of lots of information that some is requested or reviewed more often than others, but it's there at our fingertips.
But then how do you prevent staleness, right, from those queries and those types of things, and how do you strike a balance between people being willing to explore versus explore or edit and explore, let me just put it that way, versus they just want to get the answer right now, right? So that's really the things that again, from a platform, you asked me, well, how can product help? It's like, okay, well, if I'm building these things, and it's something I was like, whenever I would interview as a product leader or something, I was always ask you like, all right, well, what would you change, product that you would change? And I always pick like a couple things, right? Digital products. One of them was always for like the analytics thing, because I knew the interviewer would always have this problem, which was like, yo, why isn't that like, I don't have a worker or a cron job that literally just sends me an email for dashboards that are over 30 days old, right? That have not been updated. That literally just says, is this data still applicable to you? Right? Mm-hmm. Like, would solve so many problems, right? Or if I'm using the schema registry in place, right, and I've seen the schema has been changing for a particular query or any of that stuff, just ask me like, hey, or notify me like, hey, the schema for this dashboard has changed. These results might be out of date, right? Like, that's a product thing that most people can do, but none of the dashboards actually do that, which is kind of interesting to me. So if you're anybody that's out there that's building the next generation of dashboarding and reporting and things like that, 2 free ideas that can help you, build up that NRR, right? And get you to capture some more value.
Yeah, it's true. Actually, there's a feature in Salesforce with in the dashboards in Salesforce that actually shows you last time that dashboard was refreshed by somebody.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so, because rather it's not a live dashboard, which I thought was, at first I thought that was kind of annoying. It's not a live dashboard. Why when I go to the dashboard, how come I'm not seeing live data? And I had to click a button to refresh it. But then I realized it's kind of interesting because I can see that that dashboard was last refreshed 3 days ago. Okay, well this is, and I can see who refreshed it, so I can see that it's active and it's being used by the team. So it's kind of an interesting feature that's built into Salesforce that probably should be built into a lot more.
Oh, absolutely. But then again, how many people are actually building reports in Salesforce like that? How many clicks did it take for you to get there? You even yourself were like, yo, this was annoying as hell. But then you were like, oh, wait, actually, this isn't that bad. So yeah, there's probably some UX and usability things that probably can be improved. But definitely, yeah, I agree with you, is that, people want fresh data and they want to have the most relevant contextual information at the time of making a decision. And so that freshness should be a requirement. But again, this is the product part, right? It's like, if I'm building these dashboards and building these reports, some of this stuff needs to be real time. Some of this stuff can be, run on demand. So how do we basically inform the people like, hey, this is what the differentiation is. This is what's fresh. This is what's not. Kind of go forward at your own risk. That kind of thing.
You just need to communicate. It comes back down to that, right?
Absolutely.
And sort of sum up this whole conversation on centralization versus decentralization. How do we strike that balance from your perspective, DeVaris?
I mean, I've given a bunch of Easter eggs for this last little topic, but yeah, I mean, look, I just believe that having a asking the questions ahead of time, understanding what problems your stakeholders and customers are trying to internal stakeholders and external customers are trying to solve, and then mapping your kind of people, process, and platform around that is going to give you a good healthy balance between centralization and decentralization. Now the thing is that you have to worry about edge cases and kind of change control and all that type of stuff. But at least if you're asking the right questions ahead of time, as to how if this changes, how does this affect things, that gives you a little bit more ammunition to be more resilient to some of those change events and edge cases in the future. I'm not going to say it's 100% perfect, but at least it gives you a process so that you can be more resilient. But then the other piece of that is I would say the intentionality also is on the stakeholder side and the customer side, right? Like, you have to curate and a set of consumption tools that your stakeholders have, right? So if I know my engineers need to talk via API, whether it's GraphQL or gRPC or REST, like, these are the interfaces that I'm going to have. If my star ops, rev ops, marketing ops, fin ops, blah blah blah, if they mostly use Excel, okay, well, what is the format of the data that I need to have to be good in Excel? If like those types of things. So you really need to just kind of curate that, because the other part of it is, like, if I'm a CIO, CFO, there's a lot of tool sprawl. All right, when I get into a lot of these organizations where people bring in the things that they're used to, instead of and they're like, oh, well, I use this instead of that because this is what I've always known. And it's like, yeah, pretty much all these things, especially at the consumption layer, are kind of convergent. All right, like, there's really no difference between a lot of these tools. And so, yeah, you might have like a couple of days of like non-productivity or trying to figure things out, but like, if you can curate that on the consumption side and the decentralization side, it reduces a lot of the churn and the kind of duplication and like all that type of stuff. So again, it's just really just honestly just communication and talking to people and just trying to figure out what their success outcomes are and how they get there, right? And like just paying attention. I think that's really how you can strike a good balance between, this curated set of data that you built out for your stakeholders, and then also too, build this tool set and the stack that people are using to do their jobs, right? Just talk to people and kind of figure it out that way.
Great point. What would you add on that, David?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, like you said, it's communication. All different, sort of divisions, departments need to know and need to communicate what their intentions are in order for the product to work right. And so
Absolutely.
you end up in problems when the answer is I'm not sure, or I don't know, or we haven't figured that out yet. And then, but they just want the data. And so then you don't know what you're delivering or how you're delivering it, in what format, and so on. And it just creates problems.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, look, we're all trying to solve the same problem at the same day, which is, make more money or make our companies be more successful, right? And so, some of that stuff, kind of leans into, all right, well, now how do I make myself individually successful, and how does that accrete to these goals? But again, all that's just conversation and just talking to people, right? And kind of figuring out how they best go about their day.
Yeah, and to add on to that, like in order for you to achieve that, you have to concentrate on efficiency. You can't just look at it and say, "This is my goal. We want to make more money, or we want to sell more product, or whatever." Like you have to build in those efficiencies, otherwise you're just getting in your way.
Yep, I agree.
Absolutely. Well, this was a great discussion, and I've been dying to get into tech stack. I know you've mentioned a few tools along the way, but the tools that come to my mind just naturally as a marketer are like HubSpot, because I think of all-in-one tools. It's going to allow me to have
Yep.
forms and have a CRM for sales and marketing. It's scalable, but also like go high level, or it's just called high level now. You can have your website, you have your app, you can have your course, you can have everything in one. I'm sure there's like so many more, but as you get to a certain point, of course, you can't have an all-in-one solution like that. So like, as we're talking about tech stacks, what would be your suggestions for people, at all different levels of like, what are some tools that'll help them with centralizing their data?
Yeah, I mean, I can't go too far without saying, like, look, all these things, you just need good data into it anyway, and kind of work for a company that allows you to connect to anything and move data anywhere in real time. So I would say Meroxa. So it's kind of funny. We actually were using what was that? Workato for moving data from Stripe and our production thing into production database into HubSpot and Snowflake. But we ended up saving a whole bunch of money and time and toil by moving it to a Meroxa app. And it took us like a week to do it, to test it and like all that type of stuff. And yeah, now it, like, we basically can pull data from anywhere and dump it into anything, and like now use some of these bundled, kind of bundled tools to help us be more self-sufficient. And I think that that's really, again, it starts with the data, right? It starts with the intentionality around what are you actually trying to do. And I think that that's, shout out to Meroxa. I would say it's been pretty useful. One of the other things, like, the trend that I see though is that a lot of these companies are starting to move from kind of centers of excellence or being a point solution on one thing to now being more bundled. And I think that happens a lot of times with kind of macro circumstances. So now you're seeing HubSpot and Salesforce and some of these other tools, Twilio, starting to be able to do a ton more things, Zendesk included, because they're snapping up a lot of these companies that are smaller, that haven't been able to kind of weather the turbulent times. But that also gives them increased capabilities around doing some of these easy things. So a lot of the stuff that I'm looking at these days are like, some of these AI tools, right? Not just the weird thinly veiled wrappers around kind of chat GBT stuff, or the open AI stuff, but really, really, like, there's some competitive intelligence folks that are out there doing some really cool things. There's especially like you all are in this kind of marketing stack and automation. But then I see something like, today, like Retool, and their AI thing, like Tool now, the you can have fields that are AI enabled. So now if I want to do enrichment on the database, like I can hit an external API or those types of things, and it's done for me automatically, right? Like I'm really bullish on this next wave of kind of AI assisted tools that are doing a lot of the grunt work that just took time from pulling away business value. Like those are the things to me that are going to drive the next level of productivity and drive the next level of efficiency.
Cool.
Great points.
Yeah.
Yep. So what about you, David? Any tools you want to mention?
Oh, our usual tools. I mean, like I said in the past, my day-to-day go-to is Slack. It just allows me to communicate with everybody internally. That's kind of like the biggest go-to thing for me on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Yeah, Slack's great. We like Slack, and you can automate things on Slack now, just like at a whole new level. All right. Well, we've got time for some post-topic questions, DeVaris. So, we'd love to hear from you in terms of some more general advice. If you could go back to when you first became a software engineer, like when you were first studying this, right out of, I think you went to University of Illinois, right?
Yeah.
So if you could go back to that time, what is the number one piece of advice you'd give yourself?
That your success, well, it's a two-parter. So one of it is do your job, right? Do the job that they're paying for you. Especially as somebody that's not of the majority, kind of demographic wise, you get into this I would say this kind of like trap of wanting to help other people, and sometimes that gets in the way of you doing the thing that they actually hired you and paid you for. And you have to realize, like, look, a lot of times, like, for the diversity things and kind of recruiting things and outreach things and all of that, you don't get paid for that stuff. Like it does help your outward brand and like all that type of stuff, but you can't get in the way of the main thing. But the caveat to that is, yes, do your job, but I spent way too much of my early career trying to be the best at something, and hoping that like people will promote me because of my job. I'm doing I write great code and like all this other stuff. Like I read this book called The Peter Principle, which basically talks about it's the way that you succeed or in an organization is not based on your ability to complete tasks. It's really about making people around you like you and how they feel around you. And so those are the two things that I would give advice to myself, which is, do your job, do the thing that people pay you for, and then also, spend a lot of time figuring out like what makes people tick, make them feel good around being around you, because those are the times where I would get mad at people that were less qualified than me, that were really bad engineers or whatever, getting more opportunities. And it was just because the people that had, the decision-making capabilities, they felt more comfortable with that person. So that's the advice that I would give myself as an early software engineer coming out of University of Illinois.
Oh man, that's such great advice.
It's a really good point, and it's one that I've heard before from the perspective of, and I've never worked for a large company. I've always been a founder, and this is my third venture. But the bigger the company, and because I've had these conversations with people, and they're like, why am I not getting promoted? Like I'm seeing people around me get promoted. The bigger the company, the more important relationships are. Mm-hmm. And that's what I've come to realize in my communications with other people, is literally these, when you're talking about a Microsoft, a Twitter or something like that, that's all relationships. Yep. It's all relationships. It's comes back to who right? But the reality is, those people that are getting those promotions are not necessarily the hardest workers or the ones that do their job the best. A lot of times those people, that are incredible at their job are not necessarily the most social people. Right. And then what happens is they find themselves kind of always stuck in the same place. And that is a really, it's a really interesting that you brought that point up. And I think that's really great advice for anybody that's working at a large company, that make sure that they build relationships with their peers and with the people around them. That's what will kind of get you farther along.
Yep.
Absolutely. Great advice, DeVaris. And, I was reading stats about people just don't feel acknowledged in their jobs. And so if you can be that person who just shows up and acknowledges people and makes them feel good, then, you're just as likely to get promoted as the person actually sitting there grinding away. So no, I really appreciate that. I think it's a really important thing to say. But I think that pretty much wraps up Deconstructing Data. But in closing, DeVaris, how can the audience find you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. So linkedin.com/n/DeVaris P. Brown. Find me there. That's where I'm at professionally all the time. I'm in our Meroxa Discord too. So if you go to Meroxa.com, there's a big button there that allows you to join our Discord and those types of things. I'm always talking all things data and everything else that may come our way. I had one other thing too. I just remember my granddad used to tell me is that he used to say, do the job that they pay you for, audition for the job you want.
Really good point. Yeah, that's great. That's a great quote.
Yeah, he used to say, like, just go do the job. I mean, he also said if they don't pay no overtime, don't work no overtime. That's another thing. But he, the thing is that always when you audition for the job that you want, find mentors, find people at the place that you can shadow, that you're always asking for, like, hey, why did you make those decisions? And so you can build up that repertoire so they can say, yo, I got this thing or I got this extra work. Do you want to do that? And then eventually that becomes your job as well. So that was something that I've always kind of taken from that. I just remember while we were talking, like, oh yeah, that was a nugget.
That is good. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think that's a good way to close out Deconstructing Data. But of course, I'll make the quick plug with the QR code for OmniIQ. So if you have any first-party data, and hopefully you are organizing it and centralizing it really well, and then you can export it and import it into OmniIQ to learn about your data. So learn about your best customers and their gender, their birth rate, their household income. All of that's free. Complimentary when you upload, but of course you can upgrade to learn more about your audience, and then you can go find more people like your audience. What would you add on OmniIQ, David?
Yep, that's perfect. Yeah, finding more people about just like your audience is kind of like the AI portion of what OmniIQ can do, and that's about finding more of your best customers and then activating them on media so that you can get more customers.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming back, DeVaris. And, who knows, maybe we'll get lucky and we'll get to see you again next year.
Right on. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Take
All right.
care.
Good to see you.